For months and months, we have heard about federal cuts and impacts to people and organizations here in Idaho. Some of them pretty easy to see. People who lost their jobs in the federal government out protesting, explaining how cuts impacted them and services to Idahoans. Other cuts are harder to find. The federal government has already cut billions of dollars, and there is an impact on Idaho, but finding the Idaho slice, it can be difficult to find all of it. Oftentimes, it's published deep within spreadsheets, and you can find how the cuts are really shaping up if you have access to those or find them. First reported by the Idaho Capital Sun, there are millions of dollars, for example, in grants that the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare are now losing out on. Cuts published by Health and Human Services confirm 3 of the specific cuts and the rationale behind it. And the context here is that these grants actually date back to COVID. So these were easy ones that DOJ found. March 24th, Idaho actually saw active grants stopped with money still technically left on the table. 2 mental health grants like the one you're looking at and substance abuse grants among some very specific COVID cuts. The mental health grants paid for things like suicide prevention, hotline services, and the creation of youth crisis centers here in Idaho, namely in Canyon County. Between 2 mental health block grants, Idaho was allocated $13.3 million. A little under $6 million went unspent before the grants were canceled a few weeks ago. And this is what the savings is for the federal government. These are what the federal government is really adding up when they give you these big numbers. Idaho was also awarded a substance abuse grant to help pay for drug and alcohol rehab related to COVID. Again, there was a lot of emphasis at that time of giving states money to battle that. Idaho was awarded $6.9 million just for that, and about $6 million was spent before the grant was canceled a few weeks back. So this is in the weeds, but the overall important context for you is this is what's being cut, things that you may not see or hear about. So the question, and my question for health and welfare, what is the impact of the cuts to these major programs? Well, health and welfare, they tell me today, ongoing programs are not affected by the ending of these grants. And the Department of Health and Welfare, this is interesting, they say, is executing its exit strategies to minimize any disruptions for one-time pandemic grants. So we'll see as time goes on if gaps begin to show. You're also going to see some pretty big numbers probably floating across Idaho news sources about $26 million that was left on the table from COVID grants, specifically money that was used for vaccine and immunization programs and awareness. $68.9 million was approved, and Idaho spent about $44 million. So when you hear all these big claims from the federal government about where they're cutting all this money, this is a big piece of the pie.